The Empire had ruled the Orion cluster for 12,000 years. Their ships were beautiful beyond imagination. They were made of living crystal that grew and healed itself. They were powered by captured black holes. Each vessel was a work of art, smooth and elegant, glowing with inner light. They believed they were the greatest civilization in the galaxy, and for 12,000 years nobody had proved them wrong. On the day the human ship arrived, Emperor the Ninth was celebrating the anniversary of his coronation. Thousands of nobles had gathered in the Crystal Palace, drinking rare wines and watching dancers made of pure light perform ancient rituals. The mood was festive, self-congratulatory, and utterly secure. Then the alarms began to sound. Admiral was the first to see the sensor readings. He was an old warrior from a dozen campaigns against lesser species. He had personally overseen the destruction of 3 civilizations that had dared to resist expansion. Nothing surprised him anymore. Until now. The ship that emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of space was unlike anything in the Imperial records. It was ugly. It was a metal box, roughly rectangular, covered in antennas and sensor dishes. Its hull was indented. In several places, repair patches of different colored metal had been welded over damaged sections. Chemical thrusters burned at its rear, pushing it forward at speeds that a shuttle could exceed without effort. Admiral stared at the image for a long moment. Then he began to laugh. Within the hour, footage of the alien vessel had spread across the entire empire. Citizens on 1,000 worlds watched and mocked the primitive craft. Comedians made jokes about it on entertainment broadcasts. Children drew pictures of it in school and laughed at its ugliness. The Emperor's own daughter, Princess, found it so amusing that she ordered the footage broadcast continuously on the public channels. They called it names: the garbage scow, the metal coffin, the joke ship. Someone discovered that the aliens called themselves humans and came from a small blue planet called Earth. This only made the mockery worse. Earth. What kind of species named there after dirt? Nobody bothered to wonder why the humans had come. Nobody asked what they wanted. Nobody considered that perhaps, just perhaps, there might be more to these visitors than their ugly ship suggested. Captain Park stood on the bridge of the Steadfast and watched the welcome committee approach. 3 warships, each the size of a small moon, had positioned themselves in a triangle around her vessel. Their crystal hulls pulsed with barely contained energy. Their weapons systems, visible even to human sensors, could have cracked a planet in half. The Steadfast had a crew of 340 souls. They had left Earth 11 years ago, traveling through the vast emptiness between stars to reach this moment. Many of them had been young when the journey began. Now they carried in their hair and lines on their faces. They had sacrificed more than a decade of their lives for this mission. Was 47 years old. She had been 36 when she accepted command of the Steadfast. She had known then that she might never see Earth again. She had accepted that burden willingly. Lieutenant sat at the sensor station, his fingers moving across the controls with practiced ease. He was the youngest officer on the bridge, only 29, born during the voyage itself. The Steadfast was the only home he had ever known. "They are scanning us," he reported. His voice was calm, professional. "Deep scans. They are examining our hull composition, our power systems, our weapons. They are not trying to hide their scans at all." Nodded slowly. "Let them look." Communications Officer Lee looked up from her station. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and a memory that forgot nothing. "Captain, they are broadcasting about us. I am intercepting their public channels." She paused, listening. "They are laughing at us. They are calling our ship primitive. They say we are vermin." The bridge crew shifted uncomfortably. They had expected curiosity, perhaps suspicion, maybe even hostility. They had not expected to be treated as a joke. "Continue monitoring," said. Her voice betrayed no emotion. "Record everything." Engineer spoke from the engineering station at the rear of the bridge. She was 53 years old, the most senior member of the crew after the captain. Her hands had built half the systems that kept the Steadfast running. "Captain, they are trying to access our computer systems. Standard intrusion attempts. Our firewalls are holding without difficulty." "Let them try," said. "They will find only what we want them to find." Doctor entered the bridge through the rear door. She was the ship's chief medical officer, responsible for the health of every soul aboard. She had delivered 12 bobbies during the voyage, and she had held the hands of 19 crew members as they died. Space was not kind to human bodies. "The crew is anxious," she reported quietly, standing beside the captain's chair. "They have seen the footage they are broadcasting. Morale is suffering." Turned to look at her old friend. They had known each other for 20 years, since their days together at the academy on Earth. "Tell them to be patient. Tell them to remember why we are here." "And why are we here?" asked softly, so only the captain could hear. "Sometimes I wonder if even you remember." Did not answer immediately. She turned back to where the 3 massive warships hung in space like crystalline gods. Each one of those vessels carried enough firepower to sterilize Earth. Each one was crewed by beings who considered humanity to be insects, barely worthy of notice. "We are here," said finally, "because 11 years ago we received a message, a warning from a dying species called the—" They had refused to submit to the Empire. They had believed they could negotiate, find common ground. They destroyed them, every single one. 4 billion souls erased from existence because they dared to say no. She stood up from her chair and walked to her hands clasped behind her back. They used their final hours to send a message to every species they could reach. They told us about they told us what was coming. They told us that the Empire expands constantly, absorbing everything in its path. They told us that Earth would be found eventually, not in 100 years, not in 1,000, but eventually. Turned to face her crew. "We are not here to fight. We are not here to negotiate. We are here to learn. We are here to understand exactly what kind of beings we are dealing with, and we are here to give them a chance." She sat back down in her chair. "One chance," she said quietly. "That is more than they gave more than they have given anyone." The warships moved closer, their crystal hulls catching the light of distant stars. They were beautiful and terrible, monuments to an empire that had never known defeat. They had no idea what was coming. On the bridge of the Steadfast, Captain Park waited. She had waited 11 years. She could wait a little longer. The signal transmitter sat ready in the communications array, connected to something far away, something hidden in the dark spaces between stars. Something humanity had built in secret, over decades, preparing for a day they hoped would never come. Prayed they would prove the wrong. She prayed they would show wisdom, compassion, the basic decency that made civilization possible. But she was prepared for the alternative. The summons came 3 days after the Steadfast arrived in space. A small courier vessel approached the human ship and broadcast a single message. Captain Park was commanded to present herself at Imperial Station 7 for diplomatic processing. She would come alone. She would bring no weapons. She would submit to security scanning upon arrival. The message did not ask, it demanded. Lieutenant read the message twice, his face growing darker with each word. "They are treating you like a criminal, Captain, like someone who must beg for permission to exist." "Yes," agreed calmly, "they are. You cannot go alone. It is too dangerous. We should send a security team, or at least—" "No," his voice was firm but not unkind. "They want to see how we respond to disrespect. They want to know if we will protest, if we will make demands, if we will show weakness. I will go alone because that is what they expect, and I will show them nothing." Doctor waited by the airlock as prepared to board the shuttle. She handed the captain a small medical kit. "In case they make you wait without food or water, in case they try to weaken you through discomfort." Smiled and took the kit. "You know them well already." I know bullies, replied. They are the same everywhere in the universe. The shuttle ride to Imperial Station 7 took 4 hours. Spent the time in meditation, clearing her mind of anger and fear and doubt. She would need perfect control for what was coming. The station was enormous. It hung in space like a crystal flower, its petals spreading outward for hundreds of kilometers. Thousands of ships moved around it constantly, coming and going from 100 different worlds. It was a hub of commerce and government, a place where the business of empire was conducted. Shuttle was directed to a small docking port on the lowest level of the station, a service entrance, a place for servants and cargo and things that did not matter. She did not complain. Guards met her at the airlock. They were tall beings, nearly 3 meters in height, with smooth skin and large dark eyes. They wore armor made of the same living crystal as their ships. They did not speak to her. They simply gestured for her to follow. The walk through the station took another hour, was led through maintenance corridors and service tunnels, past garbage processing centers and sewage treatment plants. The message was clear: you are beneath us. You are not worthy of the main halls. You are trash and you will walk among trash. Walked in silence. She memorized every turn, every door, every security checkpoint. She noted the placement of guards and the patterns of their patrols. She observed everything and said nothing. Finally, she was brought to a small chamber deep in the station's interior. The room was cold, much colder than was comfortable for human bodies. The lights were dim. There was no chair, no furniture of any kind, just empty space and metal walls. "Wait here," one of the guards said. It was the first word any had spoken to her. Then they left and the door sealed behind them. Waited. 1 hour passed, then 2, then 3. The cold seeped into her bones. Her legs grew tired from standing. Her stomach growled with hunger. She ate a small ration bar from the medical kit and drank a few sips of water. 4 hours, 5, 6. She did not sit on the floor. She did not lean against the walls. She stood in the center of the room, her hands clasped behind her back, her face calm and patient. Finally, after nearly 7 hours, the door opened again. Entered the room. He was old, even by standards. His skin had faded to almost white, and his movements were slow and deliberate. He wore robes of deep purple, the color of royalty, and his fingers were covered in rings that glowed with inner light. He did not look at directly. Instead, he spoke to a small floating drone that hovered beside him. The drone translated his words into human language, its mechanical voice flat and emotionless. "Your species has been assessed," the drone said. "You are classified as Category 7, primitive, aggressive, unsuitable for integration into the Empire. Your territory will be absorbed within one standard cycle. Your people will be relocated to appropriate labor worlds where they can serve useful purposes. This decision is final. It is not negotiable." Listened without expression. She had expected something like this. The had warned them. "Your ship will be dismantled for study," the drone continued. "Your crew will be separated and distributed to different facilities for biological examination. You personally will be kept alive for questioning about your species' capabilities and weaknesses. Cooperation will result in more comfortable conditions. Resistance will result in pain." Finally looked at her. His large, dark eyes held no warmth, no curiosity, no recognition of her as a person. She was a thing to him, a resource to be used and discarded. "I understand," said. Her voice was steady. "May I ask one question?" Made a gesture that the drone translated as permission. "In your 12,000 years of empire," said slowly, "has anyone ever refused you?" This reaction was immediate. He made a sound that realized was laughter. It was high-pitched and unpleasant, like metal scraping against glass. "Refused," the drone translated. "Species do not refuse the Empire. They submit or they cease to exist. We have erased 17 civilizations from this galaxy. Your little ship, your little species, you are not even worth remembering. You are insects. You are dust. You are nothing. Nodded slowly. Thank you for your honesty. Something in her tone made pause. For just a moment, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his ancient face. This human should be begging. She should be crying, pleading for mercy, offering anything to save herself and her people. Instead, she stood before him as if she were the one in control. But the moment passed, was old and powerful, and had never been wrong about anything in his long life. He dismissed the strange feeling and gestured to his guards. Return her to her ship. Give her crew 12 hours to prepare for surrender. If they resist, destroy them. The guards took back through the service corridors, back to her shuttle, back to the Steadfast. The journey took the same 4 hours, but she barely noticed the time. Her mind was already elsewhere, processing what she had learned, preparing for what came next. When she finally stepped back onto the bridge of her ship, her crew was waiting. They had monitored her vital signs throughout the ordeal. They knew she had been made to wait in the cold for hours. They knew she had been threatened and insulted. "Captain," Lieutenant asked, "what are your orders?" Looked at her crew. These people had followed her across the stars. They had given years of their lives to this mission. They trusted her with their futures, their hopes, their very existence. She walked to the communications station, where Lee sat waiting. "Send the signal," said quietly. His fingers hesitated over the controls. "Captain, once we send it, there is no going back. Are you certain?" Thought of this words. Insects, dust, nothing. She thought of the 4 billion souls erased because they had tried to reason with monsters. She thought of Earth, her beautiful blue home, unaware that darkness was spreading toward it through the stars. "Send it," she said again. "Press the button." Somewhere in the void between galaxies, something ancient and terrible began to wake. At first, nobody noticed anything wrong. The outer colony of 7 was a small world on the edge of the Empire. It had a population of only 200 million, mostly farmers and miners who worked the rich soil and deep caverns. It was not an important world. It was not a world that anyone paid attention to. When 7 stopped transmitting, the communication officers at Imperial Station 7 assumed it was a technical problem. Solar interference, perhaps, or a damaged relay satellite. These things happened from time to time. They dispatched a maintenance vessel to investigate and return to their other duties. The maintenance vessel never reported back. Now people began to pay attention. A second ship was sent, a military cruiser with a crew of 3,000. It entered the 7 system and sent a single message. "Something is wrong here. The planet is dark. There are no signals, no lights, no movement. It is as if everyone simply—" The transmission ended mid-sentence. Admiral received the report during his morning briefing. He was annoyed. He had more important matters to deal with than a malfunctioning colony. But protocol demanded a response, so he ordered a full battle group to investigate. 12 warships, 40,000 crew members, enough firepower to crack a moon. They jumped into the 7 system and vanished from the network instantly. Now was concerned. Over the next 3 days, reports began flooding in from across the Empire. 12 had gone silent. Then the entire sector, 43 inhabited worlds, stopped responding in a single night. Then the outer rim colonies, one by one, like lights being extinguished. The pattern was clear. Something was spreading inward toward the heart of the Empire, and everything it touched simply disappeared. Mobilized the full might of the fleet. 3,000 warships, the largest force ever assembled in the Empire's history, jumped toward the spreading darkness. They were confident. They were powerful. They had never faced an enemy they could not crush. None of them returned. On the Imperial, panic began to set in. Citizens who had laughed at the ugly human ship now gathered in the streets, looking up at the sky with fear in their eyes. The entertainment broadcasts stopped showing comedy programs. Now they showed maps of the Empire, with more and more systems marked in black. Emperor the Ninth demanded answers. He summoned his advisors, his generals, his scientists. He threatened them with death if they could not explain what was happening, but they had no answers to give. Sensors showed nothing. Probes vanished the moment they crossed into the affected zones. It was as if reality itself was being erased. Sat alone in his chambers, watching the darkness spread across the star maps. He was old enough to remember every war the Empire had ever fought. He had personally ordered the extinction of 3 species. He had believed, truly believed, that they were supreme, that nothing in the universe could challenge their power. Now he was not so sure. He thought about the human captain. He remembered her strange calm, her steady voice, her single question. "Has anyone ever refused you?" At the time, he had laughed. Now the memory made him feel cold. He ordered his staff to track the human ship. The Steadfast, they had called it. Such a simple name, such an ugly vessel. Surely it was still nearby, still waiting for the Empire's response. But the ship was gone. It had slipped away quietly while all eyes were on the spreading silence. No one had thought to watch the insects. No one had considered that the dust might matter. The darkness reached the inner colonies within 2 weeks. The great shipyards of Prime stopped transmitting. The agricultural worlds that fed the fell silent. Trade networks collapsed. Communication lines died. For the first time in 12,000 years, the Empire was truly alone. On the Steadfast, now positioned safely in a distant system, the crew monitored the situation through long-range sensors. They watched as system after system went dark. They calculated death tolls that grew larger with each passing hour. Engineer sat at her station, her face pale and drawn. She had helped build the weapon that was doing this. She had spent 30 years of her life perfecting the technology, believing it would never actually be used. "How many?" she asked quietly. Tactical officer hand-checked his displays. He was a large man with a gentle voice, a former teacher who had joined the mission because he believed humanity needed protectors. Current estimate is approximately 120 billion. That includes the fleet that Admiral led into the affected zone. 120 billion. The number was too large to comprehend. It was not a battle. It was not even a war. It was something far worse. Doctor entered the bridge and stood beside the captain's chair. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep. "The crew is struggling," she reported. Many of them did not truly understand what the signal would do. They knew it was a weapon, but they did not understand the scale. "Do they blame me?" Captain Park asked. Hesitated. Some do. Others blame themselves for following orders. Most do not know what to feel. We have done something that cannot be undone. We have ended an empire. We have killed more beings than any war in human history. Nodded slowly. She had not slept either. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw this face, heard his words. Insects, dust, nothing. "They gave us no choice," she said, but her voice was hollow. "I know," replied, "but knowing that does not make it easier to bear." Another system went dark. Then another. The Empire was collapsing inward like a dying star, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. Lieutenant spoke up from his station. "Captain, I am detecting a transmission from the... It is on emergency frequencies, broadcasting in all directions. They are calling for help." "From whom?" Han asked bitterly. "They destroyed every species that might have helped them." "Play it," ordered. The voice that filled the bridge was desperate, terrified. It was speaking in the language, but the ship's computers translated automatically. "This is the Imperial calling any vessel, any station, any colony that can hear us. We are under attack by an unknown force. Our fleets are gone. Our defenses are failing. Please, if anyone can hear this message, we need help. We need..." The transmission cut off abruptly. The bridge was silent. Stared at for a long moment. Then she stood up and walked to the observation window at the rear of the bridge. Outside, the stars burned steadily in the darkness of space. They looked the same as they had always looked, beautiful, eternal, indifferent. "We came here hoping they would be different," she said quietly. "We came here hoping they were wrong, that they could learn to coexist with other species. We gave them every chance to prove they were more than conquerors." She turned to face her crew. "They failed. They chose to see us as insects, as dust, as nothing. They chose extinction over equality. This is the consequence of that choice." She returned to her chair and sat down heavily. "Continue monitoring. When the last transmission falls silent, we will return to Earth. We will tell them what happened here, and we will spend the rest of our lives trying to understand whether we did the right thing." No one had an answer to that question. Perhaps no one ever would. Engineer remembered the day she first learned about the Prometheus array. She was 23 years old, fresh out of the academy, brilliant in ways that her professors could not fully understand. The government had recruited her for a classified project, something so secret that even the name was hidden behind layers of encryption. They told her she would be working on humanity's survival. They told her nothing else. The research facility was built into an asteroid, hidden in the dark spaces between Jupiter and Saturn. 200 scientists lived there, completely cut off from the outside world. They worked in silence. They asked no questions. They trusted that what they were doing mattered. Spent the first 5 years just understanding the basic theory. Quantum physics at a level that no university had ever taught. The fundamental structure of reality, the invisible connections that held the universe together. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. The breakthrough came in her 10th year on the project. Deep in the quantum foam, beneath the level of atoms and particles, there existed a frequency, a vibration that connected everything in the universe to everything else. It was the glue that held reality together, the invisible thread that linked stars to planets to people to thoughts. Without it, nothing could exist, nothing could function, nothing could be. And humanity had learned how to cut it. The first test was performed on a single atom. The scientists isolated it, targeted the frequency, and severed the connection. The atom did not explode. It did not disappear. It simply stopped. It became disconnected from the rest of reality, frozen in a moment of eternal isolation. The second test was performed on a rock the size of a fist. Same result. The rock became a dead thing, unconnected to time or space or causality. The third test was performed on a small plant, a simple flower in a simple pot. When the connection was severed, the flower did not die in any normal sense. It simply ceased to be part of the universe. Its cells stopped communicating with each other. Its atoms stopped following the laws of physics. It became something that existed but did not live, that was present but not real. Had nightmares for months after that test. Over the next 20 years, the scientists scaled up their work. They built the Prometheus array, a network of devices hidden throughout human space, capable of generating the severance frequency across vast distances. They tested it on asteroids, on moons, on empty planets. Each time, the result was the same. Everything simply stopped. The array was not a weapon in any traditional sense. It did not destroy. It did not kill. It disconnected. It took whatever it targeted and removed it from the fabric of reality itself. Ships lost contact with their crews. Planets lost contact with their stars. Beings lost contact with their own biological processes. It was the ultimate isolation, the perfect silence, the end of everything without the violence of destruction. When the warning arrived, humanity finally understood why they had built such a terrible thing. The empire was coming. Not today, not tomorrow, but eventually. And when it came, there would be no negotiation, no surrender, no survival. The Prometheus array was humanity's answer, their final response, their last resort. Now, sitting on the bridge of the Steadfast, watched her creation at work. She had spent 30 years building it. She had believed, truly believed, that it would never actually be used. She had told herself that it was a deterrent, a threat, something to make enemies reconsider their aggression. She had been wrong. Tactical Officer Han updated the casualty estimates every hour. The numbers kept growing. 200 billion, 250 billion, 300 billion. Each number represented lives ended, families destroyed, civilizations erased. "How does it feel?" Lieutenant asked her quietly during a shift change. "Knowing that you built this." Did not answer for a long moment. "It feels like nothing," she finally said. "The numbers are too big. My mind cannot hold them. So it feels like nothing at all, and that terrifies me more than anything else." Captain Park called a senior staff meeting in the conference room. The atmosphere was heavy, exhausted. No one had slept properly in days. No one knew what to say. "The array is functioning as designed," reported. Her voice was flat, mechanical. "The severance field is expanding at approximately 4 light-years per day. At this rate, the entire empire will be affected within 6 weeks. "Can we stop it?" Doctor asked. There was hope in her voice, desperate and thin. Shook her head. "The array is autonomous. Once activated, it continues until the target parameters are met. In this case, the parameters were set to cover all controlled space." "So we have committed genocide," Communications Officer Lee said bluntly. 400 billion people will die, and we cannot stop it even if we wanted to." "They are not people," Han said, but his voice lacked conviction. "They are the same beings who planned to enslave humanity, who laughed at us and called us insects." "Does that make it right?" asked. "Does their cruelty justify ours?" No one had an answer. Captain stood and walked to the window. The stars outside were unchanged. The universe continued its endless dance, indifferent to the horrors being committed in its name. "There is something you all need to understand," she said finally. "This was not my decision alone. Before we left Earth, I met with the leaders of every nation. They knew what the Steadfast was carrying. They knew what the signal would do. They voted unanimously to authorize its use if the proved hostile." She turned to face her crew. 7 billion humans made this choice together. We are not murderers acting alone. We are the instrument of our species' will. Whether that makes it better or worse, I cannot say. But you should know that you are not alone in bearing this burden. Thought about her childhood on Earth. She remembered blue skies and green forests and the sound of rain on windows. She remembered her mother's face, her father's laugh, the smell of her grandmother's cooking. All of that still existed, somewhere far away. All of that was safe because of what she had built. "Would they have shown us mercy?" she asked suddenly. "If our positions were reversed, if they had found Earth before we found them, would they have hesitated?" "No," said simply. "They made that clear. They would have erased us without a second thought. They would have laughed as they did it." "Then perhaps this is justice," said. "Terrible justice, but justice nonetheless." "Or perhaps we have become the very thing we feared," replied. "Destroyers of civilizations, erasers of species, monsters in the dark." The conference room fell silent. Outside, in the endless void of space, the Prometheus array continued its work. System by system, star by star, the Empire was being disconnected from reality. Billions of voices fell silent. Billions of lights went dark. And aboard the Steadfast, a handful of humans wrestled with questions that had no good answers. What is the price of survival? How much blood can be spilled in the name of self-defense? When does protection become destruction? They did not know. Perhaps they would never know. But they would carry the weight of this day for the rest of their lives. Every sunrise, every quiet moment, every dream and nightmare would be shadowed by what they had done. This was the truth of the Prometheus array. It did not just sever the connections of its targets. It severed something in its creators as well, something that could never be restored, something that made them human. 3 months passed in silence. The Prometheus array completed its work and shut down automatically, its purpose fulfilled. Where the Empire had once stretched across thousands of star systems, there was now nothing but dead space. Planets still orbited their suns. Moons still traced their ancient paths, but the lights were gone. The signals were gone. The life was gone. 412 billion souls had been disconnected from reality. It was the largest extinction event in the history of the galaxy. The Steadfast remained at its position in the distant system, its crew going through the motions of daily life. They ate meals without tasting them. They performed maintenance without thinking about it. They spoke to each other in short sentences and long silences. Captain Park spent most of her time alone in her quarters, staring at star maps that no longer had meaning. The Empire was gone. The threat was ended. Humanity was safe. So why did she feel so empty? On the 91st day after the signal was sent, Communications Officer Lee detected something unexpected. A transmission, faint and fragmented, coming from deep within what had been space. That should not be possible, engineer said, rushing to the bridge. The array affected everything within the target parameters. Nothing should be functioning in that region. But the transmission was real. Cleaned up the signal, amplified it, ran it through the translation software. What emerged was a single voice, tired and broken, speaking to an empty universe. It was. The crew gathered on the bridge to listen. Even those who were off duty came, drawn by the impossible sound of a survivor from a dead empire. "This message is for the humans," his voice said through the speakers. "I do not know if you can hear me. I do not know if you are still alive, but I must speak. I must say what I understand now at the end of all things." There was a long pause. When they spoke again, his voice cracked with emotion. "We were wrong. For 12,000 years, we believed ourselves supreme. We looked at other species and saw only resources to be used, obstacles to be removed, insects to be crushed. We built an empire on the bones of those we considered inferior. We told ourselves that this was the natural order, that the strong must rule and the weak must serve." Another pause, the sound of ragged breathing. "When your ship arrived, we looked at it and saw everything we expected to see. Primitive technology, crude design, a vessel that any of our shuttles could have destroyed without effort. We laughed at you. We mocked you. We could not imagine that a species with such a simple ship could pose any threat to our magnificent empire." Made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. "We never asked why you came in that ship. We never wondered why a species that could cross the vast distances between galaxies would travel in a vessel so fragile, so slow, so ugly. We never considered that perhaps you wanted us to underestimate you, that perhaps you needed us to demonstrate what we truly were." The bridge of the Steadfast was completely silent. Every eye was fixed on the speakers, every ear straining to catch each word. "You were never diplomats," continued. "I understand that now. You were judges. You came to give us a chance, one single chance, to prove that we could change, to prove that we could see other species as equals rather than slaves, to prove that 12,000 years of cruelty had not destroyed whatever capacity for wisdom we might once have possessed." His voice dropped to a whisper. "We failed. When I looked at your captain, standing alone in that cold room, I saw only an insect. When I spoke to her of our plans for her species, I felt only contempt. I gave her exactly the answer she was looking for. I proved that we were beyond redemption." A long silence, then. "And so you pronounced our sentence, not with weapons of fire and force, but with something far more terrible. You showed us what true isolation means. You showed us what it feels like to be cut off from everything, disconnected from reality itself. You gave us the same fate we had given to so many others." His breathing grew heavier, more labored. "I am dying. The food and water in my shelter are running out. In a few days, perhaps a few hours, I will join the rest of my species in whatever oblivion awaits us. But before I go, I wanted you to know that I understand. We brought this upon ourselves. We created the conditions for our own destruction through 12,000 years of arrogance and cruelty. The transmission began to break up, static creeping into the edges. If any other species ever finds this message, let them learn from our fate. Let them understand that true strength is not measured in weapons or ships or conquered worlds. True strength is the ability to see others as equals, to build bridges instead of walls, to choose cooperation over domination. His voice faded to almost nothing. The humans understood this. That is why their ugly little ship was more powerful than all our crystal fleets combined. That is why they are still alive and we are gone. A final pause. We mocked their ship. We mocked their species. We mocked everything about them. And now our empire exists only in this final message, broadcast into the void, heard by no one. The transmission ended. The bridge remained silent for a long time. Finally, Captain Park stood and walked to the communication station. "Archive that transmission," she ordered quietly. "Mark it as priority historical document. Someday, another species will need to hear those words." Lee nodded and began working at her console. Doctor came to stand beside. "What do we do now?" Looked at the star map, at the vast dark region where the Empire had once spread its cruel dominion. It would take thousands of years for other species to reclaim those dead worlds, if they ever did. "We go home," she said. "We tell Earth what happened here. We help them understand the weight of what we have done, and we make sure they never forget why we had to do it." She turned to face her crew one last time. "We are not heroes. What we did here was not glorious or noble or good. It was necessary. It was survival. But it was also the end of 400 billion lives, and we must carry that truth with us forever." Lieutenant began plotting the course back to Earth. Tactical officer hand-secured the weapon systems for the long journey. Engineer powered down the array control interface for the final time. The Steadfast turned away from the empty space that had once been an empire and began its long journey home. Behind them, its final message continued to echo through the void, a warning to any who might listen. Beware of underestimating the small. Beware of mocking the humble. Beware of judging others by the appearance of their ships or the youth of their civilizations. For the universe is vast and full of surprises, and some insects carry more power than empires could ever imagine. This was the lesson of the empire. This was the truth that came too late to save them. This was the message that would echo through the stars forever. And somewhere, on a small blue planet called Earth, 7 billion humans waited for the Steadfast to return, ready to receive the news that the darkness was ended. Ready to step into a galaxy that was suddenly, frighteningly, theirs to explore. Ready to build something better than what had come before. Or ready to become the next empire that falls to its own arrogance. Only time would tell which path they would choose.